no one is a true nationalist unless he's ashamed of the crimes committed by a state. How can we claim freedom from the British when we treat a section of our own society so abominably? But our treatment of Adivasis is shocking. Some of the excessive force used in containing insurgencies. Any honest patriot must be open to criticizing his country. Honest nation and honest leadership of a nation would acknowledge these flaws and seek to correct them.
Does Congress also need to rethink their attitude to nationalism?
Absolutely. I mean, the Congress is going wrong with this mood of jingoism. Things have got worse. The rise of identity politics has made it even more severe. Indians are increasingly touchy about their heroes. You can't criticize anyone.
Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. Do we in India have a flawed understanding of nationalism? And how free is freedom of expression in our country? Those are two issues that are raised in a book that is published later this month. It's called Democrats and Dissenters, and here it is. Its author is the well-known and highly regarded modern historian and one of the country's foremost political commentators, Ramachandra Guha. Today, Ram Guha is my guest. Ram Guha, you've prefaced the contents of your book with a quotation from the Irish-born scholar Benedict Anderson. I want to read it out. No one can be a true nationalist who is incapable of feeling ashamed if his or her state or government commits crimes, including those against their fellow citizens. Does this mean that in your eyes, true nationalism requires feeling ashamed of your country if it does something wrong?
Absolutely. It requires reflection, critique, self-analysis, admonition. And this predates the creation of India as a nation, Karan. Now, I quote Benedict Anderson, who's really talking about Ireland, which is his homeland, Indonesia, the country he studied. But if you look at Mahatma Gandhi, that admonition, no one is a true nationalist unless he's ashamed of the crimes committed by a state, I would say that even applies to crimes committed by your society against some of its own members. One of the greatness, part of Gandhi's greatness, was that he did not think India was flawless. He was appalled by its treatments of what we call Dalits. He called them Harijans. That's an outdated term. But as Gandhi said, how can we claim freedom from the British when we treat a section of our own society so abominably? Likewise, in India today, there's many things to be proud of. We have vigorous, contentious democracy, we have a growing economy, but our treatment of Adivasis is shocking. Some of the excessive force used in containing insurgencies. Any honest patriot must be open to criticizing his country.
In fact, there's a corollary to what you've said, and that is this, that feelings of shame for your country when it's done something wrong is not a contradiction of loyalty to the country. In a very real sense, it's affirmation of loyalty. That's why you're feeling ashamed.
It's an affirmation of loyalty to your country's best ideals, which are often dishonored. I mean, Nani Palkiwala famously said, India is a first-class democracy, second-class democracy with a first-class constitution. So wherever there's a mismatch between the ideals of the constitution and democracy and statecraft as practiced on the ground, a scholar, a critic, a citizen must point to this discrepancy, must try and correct it, and must be embarrassed and ashamed if it's not corrected. And if violence perpetrated by the state continues, you must be ashamed.
Except for the fact that what you're saying is virtually the opposite of what Mr. Modi, as Prime Minister, said this March to his party's national executive. He said, criticism of the nation is not acceptable. His words were, his party was accepting of political criticism of itself, but not of the nation. How seriously do you disagree with him?
I totally disagree with it. I think every individual is a work in progress. You're improving, you're getting rid of your vices, you're more reflective, you're becoming a more humane, compassionate person. Likewise a family, likewise a company, likewise a nation. To think a nation or an individual is born perfect, immaculate, is for me, absolutely utopian. Every nation is flawed. An honest nation, an honest leadership of a nation would acknowledge these flaws and seek to correct them.
What about Congress's attitude to nationalism? I ask because, in fact, if I recall correctly, it was the Congress leader of the legislature in Maharashtra, Radhakrishna Vicky Patil, who moved to have Varis Pathan suspended because Varis Pathan refused to say Bharat Mata Ki Jai. Does Congress also need to rethink their attitude to nationalism?
Absolutely. I mean, the Congress is going wrong with this mood of jingoism. I mean, Indira Gandhi, in the time of the emergency, said anyone who criticizes me is disloyal to the nation. I mean, remember the famous India is Indira remark of Devkanta Barua. So I think the Congress parties in power tend to, advance a kind of aggressive, allegedly perfect form of nationalism, which I think is deeply harmful.
And in a very real sense, this is something that Indian television channels, I'm not deliberately naming any, but need to take on mind. They become not just nationalistic, they become jingoistic.
Indeed. As I said in a recent column in the Hindustan Times, Karan, I said, to be an Indian, you don't have to speak Hindi, you don't have to be a Hindu, and you don't even have to hate Pakistan.
Absolutely.
If India is anything, it is not the mirror image of Pakistan. Pakistan was created on the basis of religion, so Hindus and Christians were second-class citizens. It was enforced on the basis of language, so Urdu was imposed on the East Pakistanis who then seceded. And the self-definition of Pakistan has always been, we are either not India or we detest India. To be a true and patriotic Indian, you do not even have to hate Pakistan.
In the light of what we've been saying and discussing, I want to come now to one of the most striking essays in your book. It's about threats to freedom of expression in India. And you say, in one area, this is in fact one area in which the democratic deficit is substantial. You add, there has been no golden age of artistic or intellectual freedom in India. And in a sense, your conclusion is, writers, artists and filmmakers are probably less free, more vulnerable than they have been at any time since the emergency.
Yes, yes.
That's not just a depressing comment, it's a pretty damning one.
Yes, and of course, in my essay I also explain that writers who write in the mother tongue are even more vulnerable than writers who write in English. Writers who write in English are partly protected by their international reputation, partly protected by the fact that they don't really influence voters in the way in which a writer in Kannada or Marathi would. For the first time in India, we are seeing not only bans on books and bans on films,
but murders,
but assassinations of writers. And the three people who've been killed in recent years, Pansare, Kalburgi and Dabholkar, all wrote in the mother tongue. However, that said, there was no golden age. Arguably, the slide towards curbs on freedom of expression in India started with Rajiv Gandhi and his banning of the satanic verses in 1989. It was the Congress government.
It could even go back further to Aubrey Menon's book in the time of Nehru.
Probably, yeah, absolutely. So I think there has been no golden age. Things have got worse. The rise of identity politics has made it even more severe. Indians are increasingly touchy about their heroes. You can't criticize anyone, you know. You can't criticize Ambedkar, Savarkar, Golwalkar, Nehru, Shivaji. Somebody will object, somebody will file a court case, somebody will attack you. So these are not good times in that sense to be a writer or an artist.
In fact, in that particular essay, you say of the present BJP-led government, the present government at the centre is without question the most anti-intellectual government India has ever seen. And you add, Philistinism is deeply ingrained in the government and in its top leadership. But do you really believe the appointments they've made to the Censor Board or the Film and Television Institute or to the Council for Historical Research justify such a really harsh conclusion?
I think not just that. I mean, if you look at the behavior of the kind of loose remarks made by their party leadership, the fact that there is no visible right-wing intellectual class. I have another essay in this book which is called, Where Are the Conservative Intellectuals in India? If you look at any robust democracy, Karan, if you look at the United Kingdom, if you look at USA, if you look at France, if you look at Germany, they are sophisticated thinkers on the right who can argue a case in defense of patriotism, in defense of family values, in terms of the importance of community and tradition in sustaining a society.
That's missing in India.
Completely missing in India. I mean, India is, John Stuart Mill famously said about the Conservative Party in the 19th century, it's a party of the stupid folks. And the BJP is a party of anti-intellectual Philistines. I mean, right from the top leadership onwards.
When you say from the top leadership onwards, do you have in mind comments made by people like Arun Jaitley when he called the people returning awards rabid anti-BJP elements?
Absolutely, and he is in a sense the most urbane and articulate of those. I think the Prime Minister has confessed to not reading many books. I mean, the party president is not anyone's idea of a scholar-loving politician. But having said that, Karan, when it comes to freedom of expression, all parties are guilty. In Tamil Nadu, Perumal Murugan, the brave, talented Tamil writer, was not defended either by Jayalalitha or by Karunanidhi. In West Bengal, it was the left front which hounded Taslima Nasreen out of the state.
And they're still not embarrassed by that.
And their intellectuals are not embarrassed by that. It's something I talk about in that essay. You know, a group like Sehmat, which claims to stand for freedom of expression, has never really campaigned on behalf of Taslima Nasreen. So this kind of Philistinism, this kind of hostility to creative work is across the board. The BJP may be slightly worse than the other parties, but the other parties don't have a good record either.
In fact, of the Prime Minister, in that essay you have this sentence to say: the Prime Minister himself does not appear to think that intellectuals, writers and artists contribute much to society. On what basis do you make that comment?
Well, if you look at the kind of things he said, I mean, clearly he thinks that businessmen contribute, which they do. Clearly he thinks that the armed forces contribute, which they do. But under his government, the kind of appointments that were made, I mean, the appointment of Smriti Irani as Education Minister gives a sense of how much importance the Prime Minister gives to that ministry, and the kind of damage done in those 2 years that she was there in undermining the autonomy and the functioning of even our best institutions like the IITs and the IIMs. This came out very early in Smriti Irani's tenure. No less a person than Dr. Anil Kakorkar, the head of our atomic energy program, protested against her treatment of the IITs. The Prime Minister did nothing. So the Prime Minister doesn't really think scholarly work is of importance. I mean, I don't think there's anything to show that he values art, culture. If you look at the destruction of the Crafts Museum in Delhi, painstakingly built up over 40 or 50 years, and what's happening there, right under your eyes, gives you a sense. But again, you see...
This, can I interrupt and say, this is in a sense how this Prime Minister differs, not just from Jawaharlal Nehru, but even from someone like Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who was deeply conscious of the role of art, music, literature.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think he had a sense that a civilization is about more than GDP. A civilization is about more than how many bombers you have. You know, a civilization is about art, culture, aesthetics, literature, film, poetry, music. Vajpayee certainly had a sense. He had a profound sense of the importance of culture.
This BJP may have lost that sense.
Yes, and maybe this Congress has. I don't. If God forbid Rahul Gandhi was ever to become Prime Minister, I don't think that would be a golden age for intellectuals either.
Let's focus more in depth on the threats that you identify in that essay to freedom of expression. You identify 8 separate individual threats. I want to talk about 3 or 4 of them. You begin by talking about what you call archaic colonial laws. Now, everyone would agree about section 124A, which is about sedition, but you go one step further. You, in addition, identify 4 or 5 others. They include section 153, wantonly giving provocation, section 153A, promoting enmity between different groups, sections 295 and 295A, which is outraging religious feelings and places of worship. Many people say, looking at the nature of our country, which is fragile, where people can easily whip up emotions, where violence can easily break out, these laws are essential to protect the unity of the country, and they wonder whether you're right in identifying them as threats to freedom of expression.
Of course, because the fact that those laws exist on the statute book allow frivolous or malevolent petitioners to go before a court, and then a judge, you know, is either wants a blaze of publicity or is nervous, and there's an injunction on a book. Unless a book explicitly, a book or a work of art or a film explicitly advocates violence against another group, it should not be proscribed. If it has a debate or an argument, for example, there's a first-rate life of Sri Aurobindo by the Pondicherry-based scholar Peter Hees, who's Belgian but has lived in India for many years. It's a very thoughtful, subtle account of Aurobindo. But somebody goes to the Orissa High Court and says it offends my religious feelings, then you get it banned. It's a work of scholarship. Actually, it's also very sympathetic to Aurobindo. It's not adulatory.
And this is where these laws are misused, because the intention is not to ban, but they're used to ban.
They're used to ban, and anyone can go to even a lower court. And what people do, Karan, for example, Mr. Dinanath Batra, who is a zealot of the RSS interested in banning books, he goes to a court in Punjab, a small court in Punjab, in Derabasi. So you can identify courts and judges where such petitions are entertained.
And these laws actually allow judges who are pliable to misuse them to ban.
Absolutely.
So there are multiple reasons why these laws are actually a threat.
I mean, you know, outraging religious sentiments, what does that mean? If I say I don't believe in God, If I say, Lord Rama in some of his acts may have been anti-women.
Or a spoof of the Mahabharata that's doing the rounds on social media as we talk has outraged the Hindu Mahasabha. They believe criminal action should be taken. These laws would permit that.
And I also say in that essay, Karan, that we become a humanist society. Any civilized, tolerant society must joke at itself.
Absolutely. Yeah. You identify a second threat, which is perhaps in a sense today even a more damaging threat to freedom, and that is what you call the growing and continuing identity politics of our country. This unfortunately means that in Maharashtra you can't criticize Shivaji, in Bengal you can't criticize Tagore, in front of Dalits you can't criticize Ambedkar, and your conclusion is when one cannot honestly discuss the lives and legacies of real historical figures, it does not bode well for the health of our democracy. This threat, would you agree, seems to be growing worse every single year.
Yes, because every community feels offended. Every caste, every linguistic group, every regional, formation. And you must be able to objectively and critically analyze your historical figures. Ambedkar was not God. He was a remarkable figure with some flaws. Likewise with Savarkar, likewise with Shivaji. And except for Mahatma Gandhi, whom I argue in this essay, has no one to protect him because he belongs to no sect.
And that's the great paradox you point out, that the greatest of Indians is the only Indian that you can criticize without fear of reprisal and backlash.
Absolutely. Your book will not be banned, your film will not be...
You give us this, you say there is no angry, aggressive, insecure, thin-skinned sect that protects or is protective about Gandhi. But the question I want to ask is this: why does no group embrace Gandhi and protect him in the way in which they embrace, say, a Shivaji or an Ambedkar?
Because I think Gandhi, in a sense, doesn't, reflect our insecurities. Gandhi is not about insecurity. Gandhi is about being sure of yourself, so that even to the extent of being completely open. One of Gandhi's extraordinary attributes as a political leader was that his life was transparent.
But the corollary to what you're saying is that one of the reasons why people become so defensive about Shivaji or about Ambedkar is because it's showing up their own insecurities.
Indeed.
It's not protection of them, it's protection of themselves.
Indeed. And it becomes Maharashtrians against North Indians. It becomes, with Savarkar, it becomes Hindus against Muslims. With Ambedkar, it becomes Dalits against non-Dalits. Gandhi belongs to no sect. Gandhi was in that sense a true Indian because although he was a Baniya, he was not really a Baniya. Although he was a Gujarati, he worked all over India. Although he was a Hindu, he was venerated by Muslims. In a sense, because Gandhi belongs to no one, not even to a political party, there's no one to defend him, and you can say any kind of offensive thing you want about
But this also means that identity politics will continue to be a threat to freedom of expression as long as we don't overcome our own internal insecurities.
Absolutely.
And that is a very difficult thing to overcome, which means this threat will stay for a long time and get worse.
It will persist in the foreseeable future because identity politics is growing. It's increasingly important in determining elections, in how governments are formed, in how coalitions are forged, and hence no politician is brave enough to take on the excesses or the perversions of identity politics. So in this sense, identity politics of left and right, of caste, of region, of language, of religion will continue to be a threat to freedom of expression in India.
Let's take a break at that point, because when I come back I want to talk about how politicians are a threat to freedom of expression, and even more importantly how the media, which many believe should be a champion of freedom of expression, ends up in India perhaps the worst possible threat. There's a lot more to this discussion, a lot more that is critical to our understanding of nationalism and freedom of expression. So join me in a moment's time after the break for part 2. Welcome back, you're watching To The Point. My guest is Ramachandra Guha. We are discussing his new book, which is released later this month. Here it is. It's called Democrats and Dissenters, and one of the key subjects that it discusses is threats to freedom of the press. Ram, let's come now to how you identify politicians in your book as a very major threat to freedom of expression. You say their pusillanimity and sometimes their mendacity is a threat, and the example you give is from 2009 and again 2010, when you say it was suggested to Dr. Manmohan Singh, who was Prime Minister, that he should give a Bharat Ratna to M.F. Hussain, the painter, and a Padma Vibhushan to Salman Rushdie, the author. And you write, Dr. Manmohan Singh understood the merit of the proposal but lacked the courage to implement it. Now, I won't question the story, I'll accept it's true. What I want to ask you is this: why is refusing to give a Bharat Ratna to M.F. Hussain or a Padma Vibhushan to Salman Rushdie pusillanimity or even mendacity rather than just a bad judgment call?
Well, it could be both. It's pusillanimity plus a bad judgment call. Because that proposal, Karan, to refresh our memory, would have offended the Hindutva radicals who hated Hussain and offended the Islamic radicals who hated Salman Rushdie. So it would be an equal opportunity rebuff to Muslim and Hindu extremists and an affirmation of artistic freedom and a just reward of their achievements.
And an affirmation of artistic freedom, because both of these are artists and authors who had suffered because of public opinion.
Absolutely.
And we as a country and as a democracy needed to stand up for that.
Indeed, because to me it remains a matter of great embarrassment and shame that arguably our greatest living modern painter, M.F. Hussain, had to die in exile.
And Dr. Manmohan Singh squandered or failed to take up an opportunity to stand up for people who governments should stand up for.
Yes, and of course this was one of many such moments of timidity and weakness in that government, and this was one that cost artists and writers dearly.
Now, another threat that you identify in that essay, and I keep repeating that that is a critical essay for people in India to read, is one that will take many people by surprise. You identified the media as a threat, and the media, of course, is meant to be a great protector of freedom of expression. Now, I am aware and fully understand how the media's dependence on government advertising or commercial advertising frequently weakens its spine. But you've identified something far worse. You write, and I'm quoting, television channels sometimes actively encourage attacks on writers and artists. When informed of impending vandalization, some TV channels, instead of alerting the police, instead seek exclusive live coverage of such lawful attacks. Well, this is absolutely dreadful. But can I ask, are you sure of this? Are you sure this is true?
This is certainly true of incidents in Bombay where editors were attacked and a crew was told by a bunch of hooligans that we are going to attack so-and-so editor for criticizing the leader of our party, and that was followed. And there have been other cases also where even if they have not been alerted beforehand, they've seen the event and gone on to film it rather than seek to stop it. So I think this is part of a larger trend where some media channels encourage jingoism and animosity and hatred in a bid to increase TRPs, and that's one of them.
And the worst part is that this is a very well-known incident that you're talking about. I remember it crystal clearly, but very few TV channels, very few newspapers actually spoke out against this practice. They accepted it because the TRPs it was bringing in were very welcome.
Indeed. And it's a kind of this exclusivity. And I think it's, in that sense, just as nations, politicians have to reflect on the failures of their government, I think journalists and editors have to reflect on the weaknesses and imperfections of the magazines and television channels they run.
Which we very rarely do.
Indeed.
Finally, in that critical essay, you also end up saying, and this may be a paradox for some, that quite often writers, authors, artists themselves are a threat to freedom of expression. And they are the very people whose freedom is often a threat, but they are also a threat to it. Explain that odd paradox.
George Orwell once said, a writer must never be a member of a political party. That's my maxim. Either a tacit or an active member, or even a sympathizer. Now take the case of Taslima Nasreen. Because left-wing intellectuals are close to the CPM, and it was the CPM government that attacked that writer, they would not talk openly or bravely about it. Other writers and journalists are allied to the BJP or the Congress, and that inhibits their freedom of expression. I think we must have more completely independent writers and artists. I'll give you one last example if I have time.
Of course.
There's a movement going on in Karnataka now to push the government to find the killers of Kalburgi, the Kannada writer who was killed. And one of those people asked me to join the movement. And he said, then he said we must do it to make sure the BJP does not come back to power in Karnataka. To me, that is anathema. Kalburgi's freedom of expression is independent of the BJP or the Congress.
The confluence of the two is wrong because it gives the political motive to what is otherwise a good thing to do.
Absolutely.
And many times, Indian authors, writers don't realize that politics is not just coloring their vision, it's damaging their integrity.
And it is restraining their openness and their ability to perceive the truth.
Now, in that chapter on threats to freedom of expression, you come to a very interesting conclusion. You have mentioned it earlier, but I want to read out that critical sentence. You say, Indians are becoming increasingly touchy, thin-skinned, intolerant, and I must add, humorless. There's not much to admire in that, is there?
Not at all. And I think this is one of the things we can learn from the British. You know, British politics is full of self-deprecation, mocking yourself. You know, it's wonderful. And I think it would be refreshing to have it. Some of our older politicians had it. Gandhi had it in abundance. Even Nehru had it. Nehru had a sense of humor and was able to laugh at Shankar's scathing cartoons about him. You know, there was a wonderful cartoon where Shankar had him like the Niagara Falls, just spewing out words, and Nehru was able to enjoy that.
You're absolutely right when you say we can learn from the British, because something that people in India find difficult to understand, that in Britain, the butt of every popular joke on TV is the Queen. She's head of state and the symbol of the country.
Indeed.
They sell in the middle of London the Union Jack on socks and undies for foreigners to buy and wear, and they don't worry about it.
I think they're more secure about their nationalism, they're more comfortable, and we should learn from them.
Do you see things changing? You've written very insightfully about the threats to freedom of expression, but do you see the situation changing?
Not in the short term. For multiple reasons, the pusillanimity of politicians, our archaic colonial laws, and above all, I think the rise of identity politics, where open, fearless, dispassionate analysis of our figures is not permissible.
But there's even a sense in which today's overdone sense of political correctness ends up damaging someone's freedom of speech. I have in mind, for instance, the way the National Commission of Women have reacted against Ashutosh's blog, where he discusses Nehru's relationship with Reena or Gandhi's relationship with Sarla Chaudhary. I mean, concern for the rights of gender equality is one thing, but to object to someone referring factually to something that historically happened in a blog is another.
And why should the National Commission of Women call him for this? I mean, surely there are more important things going on in terms of discrimination against women on a daily basis. I mean, if you look at the vulnerabilities that young women face in this country on a daily basis in city and countryside, is Ashutosh's blog the thing to focus on?
So, even where the motive and the intention is arguably, and only arguably perhaps, correct, you end up transgressing on someone's freedom of speech, you end up reducing their liberties, and worse still, you end up making a mockery of your own concern.
Absolutely. I think this is something we should all be worried about. I don't think that any pushback will come from the political class. It has to be writers, scholars, editors, artists, and media proprietors perhaps, who have to recognize that freedom of expression is a fundamental tenet of democratic practice, and in this respect, the Republic of India is deeply flawed.
Ram Guha, a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.